Well, let's get into it then, Sam. Good to see you again. It's not as simple as if United lose, Erik Ten Hag loses his job, is it?
Well, it might be. I mean, at the start of the week, the stories coming out of Manchester and all the best connected Manchester reporters were that Ten Hag effectively had 2 games remaining to save his job. One of those was Porto, and then today is Aston Villa. I don't know whether the Porto draw in the circumstances would be enough to give him credit in the bank or otherwise. I would suspect probably not, because of the way they went 2-0 up and then pretty much collapsed. And then, yes, they got the equaliser late on, but I don't think anyone left that match or watched that match and thought, oh yeah, this was a real step forward for Man United. Not at all. So certainly if United lose heavily again in the manner they did to Spurs last weekend, it'd be very hard to see how Ten Hag could stay on, I would think, based on the reports from the guys in Manchester and what we know about the situation at Manchester United.
It's a tough one, isn't it, really, in terms of what Erik Ten Hag sort of has hanging over him. And the fact that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, came out publicly and didn't really give him any assurances on Friday, that must have been difficult as well. What did you make of the timing of that interview? Did it almost back up almost the rumours that we're hearing coming out of?
Well, to be fair, the timing wasn't by design,
Right.
because given the situation, the reporter in question did really well to go and front up Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who was actually at an America's Cup press conference, but reporters saw the opportunity and did superbly well to get him to talk about United. And the interesting thing is, as Sam says, on the one hand, it shouldn't be as straightforward as if he loses, that's it. But in the context of the big picture, this would be the latest in a litany of bad results and poor performances. 7 points, I think, from 6 games, the joint lowest of a Premier League season at this stage of the season. They failed to score in 3 of their 6 games so far. That's the worst record of any of the team in the Premier League. And the most interesting aspect of today for me is that they're up against Aston Villa. Now, Emery was appointed 7 months after Ten Hag. Emery has Villa playing terrific football. They've recruited superbly. The team is cohesive. They're in the Champions League. They're fresh from beating Bayern Munich in midweek, and they're flying. Manchester United, they seem to lurch from crisis to crisis. The team is just disjointed. There is nothing about the style of play that inspires, and so if they were to get a poor result today, it wouldn't be out of context if they were to decide maybe it's time to move on to someone else.
It's interesting. Jamie Carragher, very critical of INEOS and their decision to stick with Ten Hag. He felt they fudged their first big decision. Do you agree with that at all?
Well, it's quite interesting looking at the way INEOS approached the summer and the Ten Hag decision, because they've been quite ruthless and decisive in a lot of what they've done since coming into the club. You look at 250 planned redundancies, like quite dramatic restructuring behind the scenes, and quite decisive forward steps with the stadium and everything like that. But when it came to Ten Hag, they seemed to dither a bit and not be certain. And as I'm sure as everyone knows, they really looked at other candidates and to see what might be possible out there. And I think once you start doing that, Ten Hag's always on the back foot, and this season began, he was always 1 defeat away from everyone looking again at his future, and everyone knew that they were looking for other people. He knew it, he spoke about it himself, and all the players would have known that too. That a couple of bad results and the manager would be under big pressure. And I find it very interesting that they were so unwilling to make that big decision, which I think a lot of people were expecting at the time. They didn't make it. And obviously the caveat here is that Dan Ashworth, Omar Barada, they didn't start until later in the summer. So they were on gardening leave prior to the decision.
Yeah, they almost sort of, dare I say, washed their hands of it as well when we had that sort of meeting with them. Melissa Reddy was telling us about that, the fact that they sort of said, well, that happened to us prior to us arriving. So it's like everyone seems to be sort of almost backing off. It appears. Yeah, well, nobody wants to be associated with the kind of negativity connected with where Manchester United are now. And, at big clubs, even the shortest run of poor performance is a big story. For us as newspapers, outlets, for Sky Sports, for all broadcast entities, Man United are a superpower, not just in European but in world football. The run they've been on, the decline of the club, the progress of other comparable clubs over a similar period, it's just been so pronounced that it has to be
brought into sharp focus on a day like today. You cannot legislate for which Manchester United will turn up from 1 week to the next. They've invested a huge amount of money in players that haven't performed. £81 million on Anthony. Whatever you say about the package or whatever, 5 goals, I think it is, in the time he's been at the club in the Premier League. Well, I think in all competitions, it's just not good enough. I think there are a number of other players in whom, and to be fair to the club, they have invested in those players, but those players haven't managed to provide a return on that investment. And as Sam was saying, the summer really represented an opportunity for them to turn around and say, maybe let's do it differently. And later in the hour, I'll give you a few more papers where there has been comment and analysis on that decision to stick with Ten Hag. But the problem they have now is that if they do decide to make a change, would a manager want to inherit some of the underperforming stars at the club right now? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and there's statistics that don't help as well. I mean, since he's joined the club, no Premier League club has conceded 3 or more goals in a match more times in all competitions than Manchester United. It's something that he just hasn't been able to get right. I know Erik talks a lot about injuries, but, you know, there's a lot of shuffling the pack as well, and sometimes a lot of the fans are thinking, what are you doing there? You know, there's a lot of questions that hang over him. Why do you feel he hasn't been able to sort out things like just that statistic in itself?
I mean, the injury thing, he made that point repeatedly last season, and with some justification. United did have a lot of players out. But the excuses are running out now for Ten Hag, unfortunately for him, because this year they've not got many serious injuries. Tyrell Malacia, of course, but they've not got key players missing, and they've also backed him with players he wanted to sign, players he's worked with before, like Matthijs de Ligt, for example, or Mazraoui at fullback, players from Ajax, and players who he's seen and knows. And he's not been able to impose any kind of discernible style of play, and that's always what baffles me the most about Ten Hag, is if people say to you or to me or anyone, what's his style of play? I still don't know. He's been there for more than 2 seasons now, and I'm sure United players aren't entirely sure either. And
do you think he knows?
I'm not sure.
But I mean that in the nicest possible way. Do you think he's kind of getting swayed by certain things?
I actually hope for his sake that he doesn't know, in the sense of if he had a clear, defined plan and he said, I want to play like Pep Guardiola does, or whatever. Like some managers do want to do that. If he had that clear, defined plan, then he's summarily failed to do it. So I kind of hope for his sake that he's not, and he wants to be more flexible. And I think he has spoken before about being good in transition and being flexible, but those things just simply haven't happened. And you have to look at it and think, you've had time, you've had investment, the structure changing at the club, everything that people said were mitigating factors for failure, they've all been addressed now, time, investment, structure, and the results still aren't coming. And I think at this point, I think very few people would be sort of overly sorry for Ten Hag if he does get the job.
What are the papers saying? Dare I say it's probably a lot of Erik Ten Hag.
There is a lot of
papers,
comment on Ten Hag. Firstly, obviously, because there is a game today, but also because, as I was saying before, it is a huge story. I want to start with this one because this throws it forward, as we like to do in the newspapers. Look at the headline, self-explanatory. The hierarchy, meeting on Tuesday after Ratcliffe watches Ten Hag's side play Aston Villa. It'll be the first time he's watched them since they were beaten 3-0 by Liverpool. The meeting is long-standing, it has to be said. This is a really good piece in The Athletic. So Jim will be there, Sir Dave Brailsford, the Chief Executive, Omar Barada, the Sporting Director, Dan Ashworth, the Technical Director, Jason Wilcox, and the United co-chairman, Joel Glazer, flying in from the US, says The Athletic, to attend this meeting too.
Is Erik Ten Hag at this meeting as well?
It's not clear from this piece whether Ten Hag will be at that meeting, but it says that any ultimate call on Ten Hag's future will come from the ownership. They will base their recommendations on their call on the recommendations of Barada, Ashworth and Wilcox. I'll spin you through a couple of others as well. The Mail, Jack Gordon's match report yesterday. But I'll tell you what, I'll do that after. But what I'll just say is this, just in relation to what you were saying about that 24-match unbeaten spell during which United have conceded 3 goals or more. Martin Samuel does talk about that. We don't have the graphic, but I will just read it to you anyway because it's really important. Chelsea are a club, he says, who have underachieved of late, yet it's taken them 7 head coaches, including caretakers, and more than 4 years and 3 months to amass the same record, 24 games in which they've conceded 3 goals or more. City's countback would go back to March 15, 2017 against Monaco in Pep Guardiola's first season. For Ratcliffe, it is hard to argue against the idea that it's a dereliction of duty for such a top club to be conceding so many goals on so many occasions.